want to thank several people and groups for helping to organize today's session, especially the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, Latin American Studies program, the English Reading Series, the Department of Humanities, Classics, and Comparative Literature, as well as the Department of Asian Languages. So a lot of people helped to organize this, and we appreciate the support and that we received from each of these organizations. I first met Adriana, I was first introduced to Adriana's work a number of years ago when I was first starting my PhD program. I was knee-deep in courses on 18th and 19th century literature, and I was looking for something a little more recent just for the sake of variety, and a friend recommended to me the novel Sinfonia em Branco, Symphony in White. And I had never heard of Adriana Lisboa before, and I read the novel and was just profoundly moved by the novel, and I became interested in Adriana's work and subsequently had occasion to meet her, and we have been able to correspond and meet over the years. Let me give you a little background about Adriana. Adriana Lisboa was born in Rio de Janeiro. She currently resides, though, in the United States, outside of Denver, since 2007. She has published 5 novels: The Threads of Memory, Symphony in White, which was a book that led critics to consider her one of the most important authors of a new generation of writers in Brazil. Her other 3 novels are Columbine's Kiss, Rakushisha, which has been translated and is coming out this year as The Hut of Fallen Persimmons. And her most recent novel is called Corvo Azul, Crow Blue. Her work also includes a collection of short stories and poetry in prose called Calligraphies, as well as a novella entitled The Heart Sometimes Stops Beating, which was adapted into a film and directed by Maria Camargo. Her work also includes 3 books for children: A Tongue Made of Scraps, The Siren and the Butterfly Hunter, which were both illustrated by Rui de Oliveira, and then another collection entitled Japanese Popular Tales, illustrated by Janaína Tokataka. She's won several awards. Her work has been translated and is published in 7 different countries, including Italy, Mexico, Switzerland, France, Sweden, as well as the United States. And among the awards her work has garnered is the José Saramago Prize, which is a very prestigious literary award given in Portugal. In 2007, the Bogotá 39 Hay Festival selected her as one of the 39 most important Latin American writers under the age of 39. And apart from being a wonderful writer, she's also quite an accomplished translator and has translated many texts into Portuguese, including Marilyn Robinson's Home, as well as Cormac McCarthy's The Road and No Country for Old Men. And just on a personal note, I would just like to say that Adriana is she's a very different writer from most of the writers that I'm familiar with in Brazil. And by that I mean that her work doesn't give in to many of the stereotypes that Brazilian authors typically work with. She's a very grounded author, a very curious person with wide interests, someone who is easy to talk to as well. And I'm sure you will enjoy hearing from her today. So please join with me in welcoming Adriana Lisboa.
Well, thanks, Rex, very much for your very kind words. It is a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about my work with you and to read a little bit from my books. I planned to start with the reading, and then I would say a few words about my career as a writer. that officially began 11 years ago. Then I decided to mingle the reading with a couple of considerations I thought would be relevant to share about my work and how I understand it in the midst of the diverse literary scene in contemporary Brazil, or in a broader sense, in the context of world literature today. I truly believe that whatever is local in any work of fiction must transcend this and touch what is common to every single one of us. So even if I read a book about a Roman emperor, or say a science fiction novel set on another planet, I can recognize myself in it, or at least recognize my human condition in it. For me, this is, I'm sorry, this is the true magic and the challenge of fiction writing, of storytelling, and it knows no boundaries. So I'm not particularly concerned about Brazil in my books, even though Brazil is almost always present, simply because I'm Brazilian and because I've lived for 35 years in Brazil. The same thing can be said about other contemporary Brazilian authors. On our individual paths, some of us are indeed concerned mainly with depicting the country's social reality, its social problems, urban violence, drug wars, the thing you sometimes read about in the newspapers. Others are following paths that are altogether different, or going back to the good old tradition of storytelling for its own sake. In some cases, being Brazilian can be a mere coincidence. It's important to underline that each literary voice is its own universe, even if we can recognize similar tints here and there. It is very curious and also frustrating, therefore, that when it comes to translating Brazilian authors, publishers still favor the ones who have a local color of sorts. As writer and professor Silviano Santiago once said, a French author can write about whatever he or she wants, but a Brazilian author has to write about Brazil. It is still, unfortunately, so. When we talk about world literature, it is still mostly expected that a Brazilian writer and a Chinese one, an Angolan one for that matter, write about their own countries with as much local color as possible. It is as if the Brazilianness of a Brazilian were more important than the Frenchness of a French person or the Britishness of a Brit, and that we have to assert ourselves from there, from that starting point. To me, in my literature, it matters only up to a certain point the fact that I come from my country. My cultural background is, of course, imprinted in me, in who I am and how I speak and how I write, but I don't have a literary plan for myself that includes or excludes writing about Brazil. Again, it is only the fact that I was born there and lived there for more than 3 decades that makes it a recurring character in my books, so to speak. But I presently live in a peculiar situation. I'm in America, but I'm not American. And except for one poem or two, I don't write in English. And I'm from Brazil and write mostly in Portuguese, but I don't live there. And when I visit my family once a year, I have to catch up with slangs and other things that are going on and that are obvious to everyone, but that I'm totally unaware of. One of the subjects that have interested me the most is the subject of otherness, of being a stranger in the broad sense of the word, because you can actually be a stranger, as I'm sure you all know, in your own country, in your own neighborhood, sometimes in your own family. The Czech philosopher Willem Flusser once wrote this while living in France. The sadder is a stranger in the park. I'm a stranger in France. Man is a stranger in the world. But regardless of this, we try to establish networks and build comfort zones so as not to feel the weight of this strangeness. It can actually be frightening because it makes us feel like we don't have a ground. And this is the experience of many or most immigrants. It is the experience I had when I first arrived in France, where I lived for a year when I was 18 and I felt looked down on by the Parisians, or in Japan, where I went to do research for a book in 2006, and it was one blunder after the other. It is also the experience I had when I moved to Colorado 4 years ago. I had never even seen snow in my whole life. And all of a sudden, there I was, in the midst of a very hard winter, straight from the summer in Rio, not able to understand temperatures in Fahrenheit, not having the appropriate clothing, not knowing the traffic rules, not really understanding the Coloradan accent. So all of this can make us feel pretty awkward and clumsy and out of place, but at the same time, the very fact that we let go of our comfort zone, either because we choose to or because we have to, opens unexpected doors before us. It's like we are offered the opportunity to take a fresh look at situations we were used to taking for granted, and are able to acknowledge the fact that the world is diverse. It can be surprising. People can be surprising. Sometimes the surprises are frustrating and we truly regret the whole adventure, but sometimes they are amazing. And if you don't take a chance, if you don't expose yourself with curiosity to the risky aspects of life, you don't get a chance to enjoy the beauty. The three books that I'm going to read passages from deal, I believe, with different aspects of otherness, of being a stranger. The first one is called Symphony in White. It is my second novel. It was published in Brazil in 2001, and after being translated in other countries, it came out here in the US last year. It is a story of two sisters who are strangers in their own family, in a time that one was forced to be silent in Brazil because of the military dictatorship. So, in other words, a time when many people felt like strangers in their own country. Speaking up could mean prison, torture, and death or exile. And in the life of the two sisters, it could mean the same in another sense. Ugly things were happening in their own family, and everyone kept silent about it, as if they had a morbid agreement of sorts, until the younger sister says, well, enough is enough. The passage I'm going to read is the moment when the younger sister, still a child, sees something that she was not supposed to see, and that's going to change her life forever. The translator is Sarah Green. The afternoon is cool and pleasant. The cypress trees smell wonderful and are full of those small green seeds children like to collect. It is that precise, subtle moment in which the sun has disappeared behind the hills, but has not yet taken away all its light. 9 years old is just another way of saying promises. Life is a vast seam of precise moments, a telescope set up below the vast night sky, or a microscope that examines a drop of water. Oh, the cypress trees smell so good. And this young child's body, how fluidly and easily it runs. Everything matters. Everything has a function, even little green cypress seeds. Later, the children will turn them into an alternative monetary unit and negotiate. How much does that mud cake with chopped daisy icing cost? 5 cypress seeds. 1 smile, 2 smile, 3 smiles. 1 tiger, 2 tigers, 3 tragic tigers. This is an era in which time has a smell. It just might be possible to make a time perfume. Of course, this 9-year-old girl has already thought of that. She runs, alone and happy. The most authentic happiness, the kind that doesn't need to be recognized among the cypress trees. Each cypress tree has a body and a face. Each one has a soul. She has no doubt of that. That is why she asks their permission to take their green seeds. The sky is so weightless. Looking at it reveals a precise notion of infinity. But infinity can die in a second. Or infinity can die in a second that will freeze and last forever, the opposite of infinity. a moment that grabs childhood by the neck, immobilizes it on the ground with an arm lock, and crushes its fragile lungs until it suffocates. A moment that dries up the roots of the cypress trees and crushes underfoot mud cakes with chopped daisy icing. The hall in the house smells like freshly waxed floors. She walks on the tip of her toes. She thinks by doing so she is already training to be a ballerina. She wants to be a ballerina when she grows up. And she has a doll, a present from her godmother, with a net tutu, ballet slippers, a hairnet on its hair, and a tiara with small white stones that she thinks are real diamonds. They must be. Her godmother is very rich. Her cupped hands hold several dozen cypress seeds. She too is rich as her godmother. The door to the bedroom is half open. The bedroom door is not usually half open. Something moves inside, a monster with only one eye that drools and grunts and grits its horrendous jaws, the monster that devours childhoods. She sees. Afterwards, the cypress seeds fall from her cupped hands. She wants to close her eyes and go back in time. At that instant, the sun begins to steal away its light, but the night that is begotten is different from all others. It is a night that is stillborn. The seeds roll along the recently waxed floors, and the tear of pain and fear rolls down the face of the girl who now flees, still on tiptoes. No longer, however, because she wants to be a ballerina. Now she wants to avoid being heard. She does not want them to know she knows. The cypress seeds lie scattered on the floor. 6 years after this book, Symphony in White, I published in Brazil a novel called Hakushisha, my fourth novel. It's a Japanese word, a very concise one, and it means hut of fallen persimmons. This is actually the title of the American translation of the book that is coming out this spring. It tells the story of two Brazilians who go to Japan. Haruki, one of them, is a book illustrator, and even though he's of Japanese descent, he couldn't care less about Japan, doesn't speak the language, and has never visited the country. He is invited to illustrate a translation of one of Matsuo Basho's travel diaries. Basho is a classic Japanese poet who is, to this date, regarded as one of the most important haiku writers of all times. So Haruki goes to Japan to look for traces of Basho, of his life, and of what inspired his work. He's joined by Celina, a woman he meets in the subway in Rio, and to whom he makes the unexpected and unplanned invitation to accompany him to Kyoto. So they go together, but not as lovers, and each one has their own painful secret, something that was imprinted on their lives in the past, and that the trip to Japan will make them face. Perhaps precisely because they leave their precarious comfort zones and reach a sort of limbo, an in-between place. It is a journey towards an unknown country and an unknown culture, but also toward themselves and the unsolved things in their lives. This translation was also made by Sarah Green, same translator who worked with Symphony in White. They almost didn't allow Haruki to go up to the 10th floor, where the Consulate General of Japan was located in Rio de Janeiro. "You'd better hurry," said the girl at the reception desk. "They shut the office at 5 o'clock sharp and don't like anyone going up when it's near closing time." He presented his ID, grabbed the car to go through the turnstile, and entered the elevator out of breath, his clothes disheveled and his hair a mess, his face gleaming with sweat. The clerk who waited on him was wearing an impeccable navy blue suit. He greeted Haruki in Japanese, and Haruki found himself obliged to say that he didn't understand. He explained his situation, the category of the visa he wanted. He handed over the proper documents. The clerk in the suit said to him in a low, precise voice, "Please fill out this form, but do it quickly because we are closing up for the day." Haruki felt like a foreign object. He shouldn't have been perspiring. Or if he had to be perspiring, he could at least speak rudimentary Japanese. His facial features, his name, everything imposed that responsibility on him, a responsibility to which, however, he had never deferred. He had the basic information. He had grown up hearing some Japanese at home, above all when his grandparents came to visit. But that was years ago, and during all those years he had had more than enough to do and no talent whatsoever for languages. The world was not composed of letters, but of shapes and colors. The world, in other words, was watercolorable. At his side, on a wooden bookcase filled with flyers in Japanese, a colorful, perfect origami ball observed him. The ball was larger than a closed fist, made with several pieces of paper. Haruki felt completely awkward, as if he were the antithesis of that colorful origami ball, so tardy, so untidy, and so un-Japanese. What right did he have to go around sporting a pair of slanted eyes? It was sprinkling when he left the consulate with the promise that his visa would be ready in 2 days. Category G, Cultural Activities. He opened the umbrella that he had miraculously remembered to put in his knapsack. The traffic was showing signs of day's end, the flow from downtown growing heavier. Flamengo Park was whitewashed and opaque, coated with a thin membrane of rain. On the sidewalk, people without umbrellas hurried along, shoulders huddled in involuntary gestures of protection, frowning, taking short, rapid steps. Some covered their heads with their briefcases, with folded newspapers, bodies pierced by the cold wind that now blew in from the beach. Haruki walked to the corner of Machado de Assis Street and headed down toward the subway station, which would also be showing signs of day's end, nothing he wasn't accustomed to. The sweat on his face had dried. It was good to feel the cold wind blowing through his shirt and in his hair. Suddenly, it was good to be there, in Rio, at that very moment, and to be who he was, an illustrator with his knapsack on his back. For an instant, it was good that it was raining, and to know that within 10 minutes he would arrive at Largo do Machado station. It was good to know that there were things like the inversion of seasons in the 2 hemispheres, time zones, places where the sun rose as it set somewhere else, almost science fiction type things. It was good to know that a Rio, Japan did indeed exist, a place where people opened their umbrellas or bewailed the lack of an umbrella, and where they stepped on a different solid ground. The gentle rain turned the world luminous in Haruki's eyes. The worn-down Machado de Assis street asphalt glistened. The parked cars glistened. The leaves of the trees, the ironwork fences in front of the buildings. Even the sounds of things glistened in the rain. The car wheels on the asphalt, the screech of a car suddenly braking and the honk of a horn, the doorman's radio blaring. It was necessary to recognize and revere these moments. They were fleeting and rare. Moments during which, for no apparent reason, everything seemed to get on track, to adapt, to fall into place. All questions and the need for them disappeared, as did rushing, having a place to go, coming from some place. Simply the soles of shoes striking the wet sidewalk, and there you have it. The world needed no other meaning. One foot in front of the other. Fleeting, rare moments. That particular one dissipated suddenly at the corner of Katechi Street. Haruki realized that he was losing something. He even glanced back automatically to see if a piece of himself had fallen on the sidewalk. But it was the instant that was disintegrating, a spoon of salt in water. And Haruki stirred the spoon, disintegrated the instant, because it could not be otherwise. If we do not kill our epiphanies, they will kill us. And he crossed the street in the familiar direction of the subway entrance. Here it is. Well, finally, I get to my latest novel, published last year in Brazil and still being translated into English. I have a very short sample translation from the first pages, and that's what I planned to read. This novel is called Crow Blue, an expression that I borrowed from a poem by American poet Marianne Moore. This color, crow blue, works like a sort of cement linking situations throughout the book. It is the color of the crows and ravens in Colorado, but also of the shells on the bottom of the sea in Copacabana. The book tells the story of a 13-year-old girl, Vanja, whose Brazilian mother was a single mother living in the US. Vanja never knew her father. But after growing up in Rio and after her mother gets ill and dies, Vanja decides to look for her American father. Crow Blue is the story of this search and of the unexpected friendships that pop up in Vanja's life because of it. I actually see the book in the first place as a book about friendship. Vanja comes to the United States to live with the most unlikely person, her mother's ex-husband from before the time she was born. This man, Fernando, who will help her to look for her biological father, was a communist guerrilla in Brazil in the beginning of the 70s. He had to leave the country because the army was after him. He went to London, worked at a pub, and ended up in the United States cleaning houses and working at a public library. They are truly immigrants, and of course many of their experiences are my own, but at the same time they're not. I believe that when we write fiction, we are autobiographical even when we don't mean to be, and are not autobiographical even when we mean to be. This is because, of course, our memories and our imagination mingle, get entangled, and we don't always know which is which. This translation was made by Alison Entrakin, who is one of the most respected translators currently from Portuguese into English, and she has translated, among other authors, Chico Buarque and Cristóvão Teza. The year began in July. The place was strange. Sweat trickled down inside me, behind my skin. I sweated and my body stayed dry. It was as if the air was hard, solid, made of stone. I'd drink glass after glass of water until my belly felt bloated and heavy, but it was always the same, the dry sweat and the hard air and the sun with a stinger in every ray. There was no breeze, no current of air to bring me a little relief, slipping through the cracks in my blouse, ruffling the hem of my skirt, or rustling my hair with promises of salvation. On the other hand, I never saw cockroaches. The American cockroach, Periplaneta americana. I once read that they had the ability to regenerate themselves depending on the severity of the injury. I knew them intimately, personally and by reputation, the only creatures capable of surviving a nuclear holocaust, etc., from surprise encounters in the kitchen and the hall leading to the service elevator. In Copacabana, they were everywhere. But I didn't see any cockroaches here. It's possible that they were there and managed to withstand the constant lack of moisture and harsh winters when it was winter, but they were much more discreet. I was 13. Being 13 is like being in the middle of nowhere, which was accentuated by the fact that I was in the middle of nowhere, in a house that wasn't mine, in a city that wasn't mine, in a country that wasn't mine, with a one-man family that, in spite of the intersections and intentions, all very good, wasn't mine. My knuckles turned white, threatening to split. It was weird. I seemed to be progressively transforming into something else, as if undergoing a slow mutation. Maybe I was becoming a lizard, or one of those plants that can flourish in the desert. Maybe I was mineralizing and turning into a temporary river, the sort that vanishes into the parched riverbed in the dry season, and then swells and tumbles happily along as if there's all there was to be, tumbling happily, peril-free, as if its own life as a river wasn't seasonal and brittle. More than once I thought in the first few months that this wasn't a place made for humans, no more than for cockroaches. And yet, humans had lived there for 13 millenniums, wrestling with the place, long before the gold and silver mines of the 19th century, long before Buffalo Bill. I thank you very much for coming here to share this time with me, for your interest, and since we have some time for discussion, you are very welcome to make any comments or ask any questions. Thank you.